So the goal in this last section is still on how beauty can redeem the world, and we had to make some sort of argument for how beauty cannot be totally objective. Otherwise, we're right back to where we started from. You think it's what I think, and if we're going to apply that type of subjectivity to justice, then all we could do is give justice to the people that yell or cry the loudest, right? So if we're going to say that justice has something, in a sense, objective to it, we're also going to have to conclude that truth has something objective to it. And what we call good is going to be objective because it's going to be something necessary for the human person. And I've tried to make the claim, at least with just introducing that epistemological ladder, beauty, truth, and goodness, that beauty is the bottom rung. And if we don't quite get that right, then everything else is not going to be attainable for us. So I'm going to continue a little bit here. I'll use some literary references again, so we'll look a little more at Dostoevsky. But the idea is, let me ask you something. When you're in an argument or a discussion and you realize that you're starting to lose the argument, what's an effective way to get yourself out of that so they don't play gotcha or just make you look like you're totally in error? What are like foolishest ways to get out of an argument? Think about what we do with our own parents when we were like little, right? We got caught red-handed. We try something else. So anybody have any insight on that?
Quickly change the subject.
Change the subject, right? You come home and you have bad grades, and next thing you know, you start on your parents. Is that all you care about? I'm a good person, right? It's a red herring. You do your best. Go ahead, Duncan.
Or you bring up something more positive that would distract them from the thing at hand.
Yeah. We've all done it. Absolutely. There's always that instance of deflection, of distraction. So let's start from a premise here, which should be an easy premise in a Catholic college, is that if we're going to believe that goodness exists, we're going to believe that evil exists. Now, before you just start to think we're personifying evil as some, devil-like object, remember that, evil is the absence of good. So evil does not have like a metaphysical reality in itself. It exists wherever there is not goodness. An example that's often used is like the buttonhole in your shirt. You would refer to it as a hole, but it's really where there is not a shirt. So what we have to then consider is, what is this battle that goes on in our own particular lives with spirituality? I've been teaching for a long time. And one thing I've realized, and this, again, I tried my best to offer my own experiences. When I was a teenager, and I told you the struggles I had with keeping my faith and such, and I was really not looking into other religions. I was really, going towards agnosticism or atheism. And I'm not reflecting on anything how you might think, so don't read into this. But I started to believe that you had to think for yourself. And a person who thinks for yourself cannot simply accept what you've been handed. In other words, you may have to start from scratch. And I started to almost get into an intellectual type, how do you want to say, ethos. And I thought I was original. I thought, well, I'm one person that's not going along with the flow. What I realized as I got older is I was a cliche. I don't mean that against anybody who has that particular, sensibilities. But if there's one thing I've learned over the many years of teaching, is that that's the average teenager. I didn't think I was the average teenager at the time. I thought I was the one that was breaking free. And that's a problem too, because that's a real deflation of my pride. It was. Now, what's interesting is also, like, a lot of students that I've, had over the years, they stay in touch. If they're in the area, they even stop in. And oftentimes, ones that were very devoutly Catholic dismissed it. I don't argue with them. It's never my point. But they never dismissed it and went to nothing. They dismissed it and went to something else that seemed to fit the bill. And I'm just always curious, and I ask them, like, well, why did you take on that level of spirituality? Like, why did you, like, it might be some, Eastern spirituality. It might just be a naturalistic spirituality. And, they're usually pretty upfront, and they say, well, because it resonates with me. It seems to be something that, fits who I am. And it doesn't have all the dogmatic garbage that the Catholic Church or Judaism or any religion would have. And I can appreciate that. But I also ask him, I said, is it demanding of you? Like when and I'm not making fun of anybody who has these particular positions, because some very good students, I call them friends now, they're just past students. They'll talk about meditating, sitting out in the backyard meditating and putting, stones or crystals on their lap to receive the energy from it. And they're just trying to really trying to, and I don't mean this in a mocking way, trying to be one with what they feel is like a universal spirit. And, but I asked him, I said, but what's the demands it makes in you? Does that require you to live differently? There's a sense for it there, but we're always looking for something to fill a gap. And it's interesting that there's always a gap that needs to be filled. And you've already should understand, I don't mock those types of things, even if I disagree with them. Anybody who's searching for truth, I'm all behind that. But what I've realized also over the years is that people don't search for things that are bad. They search for things that they believe are good. Just like we don't purposely eat things that are bad. We might realize it's not the best for us, but we're not going to eat something that we think is poisonous. We're going to eat something that we think is good. So there's always perceived goods that we're always choosing and searching for. And a perceived good is a distraction, because it's not the real thing. It's like eating something that's probably not as nutritious, and it doesn't have the protein and everything else that's necessary for us to sustain ourselves physiologically. So we eat things that kind of makes us feel good for the moment, but it doesn't have any lasting effect. But we still search it because we still have a need to be filled. And, that winds up then being something that distracts us from another good. Now, I brought up evil in the beginning because if we're going to say there's a good and there's an evil, then we're going to have evil that's going to try to distract us. And the evil is going to distract us in the same way that we try to get out of an argument with our parents. We're going to come up with alternatives. We're going to find ways to deflect. It's the only way we can. When I do marriage prep courses, I often tell them that most of the issues you're going to have in your marriage are not going to be issues that are directly between you. They're going to be deflections. And you're not going to recognize them as deflections. You're going to think that these are things that are coming between us, because it doesn't take much to get a husband and a wife against each other. It just takes a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of mistrust. And if you want to think about it, if you want to personify, evil as the devil, he's over in the corner with his, Staples easy button, just smacking and going, that was easy. It's easy to pit two people against each other. Especially your siblings or perhaps a boyfriend, girlfriend, how to get under their skin. It's not hard, right? Well, evil's that way with the human person. It's evil. It doesn't take much for evil to sort of integrate our lives and find distractions. So I'm going to make the case, and what I'm trying to continue to make the case today is that that's done through beauty. And if you want to, use the word equivocally, the beauty of that is we don't see it coming. So the greatest deception is not one that you realize. It's the one that you never realize. Here's a literary thing. Has anybody ever read the book or seen the movie Devil's Advocate? No? Okay. You have, Duncan? Okay. Keanu Reeves, can't think of who the devil was.
Was it Al Pacino?
Al Pacino, yeah. I wanted to say De Niro. I knew it wasn't him. So let me give you a real quick scenario on it. And it's an older movie, so I don't mind the spoilers here. You have Keanu Reeves, who's this lawyer who's actually working with his client who was a child molester. But the child who's testifying in court has a learning disability. And Keanu Reeves does a pretty good job of breaking up her testimony and gets his client off. Well, this guy's been on a run as a lawyer. And when he goes to the bathroom, there's a reporter in there that's really trying to, come on, give me a story, this and that. And he's like, no. And he goes, well, I'll call you later, this type of thing. It turns out that Al Pacino is, long story short, his father and also the devil. Now, Al Pacino's a lawyer in New York and courts and recruits Keanu Reeves to go and work for him because the guy doesn't lose. He seems to win wherever he goes, this type of thing. Well, it takes a while for him to realize that he's being played. And the only way that he can get out of this is almost to return to his previous life. I won't go through the whole scenario how he did this, within the movie. But the way that he breaks, his connection with this evil is that he returns to the original moment where he's in the courtroom again. And this time, rather than giving a vigorous defense that exonerates which he knows his guilty client, he excuses himself. Well, that's an uproar. His client thinks that he's abandoning him. The judge doesn't understand it. His wife is saying, what are you doing, baby? What's going on? I mean, here's going to be his first loss, if you want to call it that. But he knows he can't do it. He knows that it's all a game, and he knows that he's been played by the devil. So when he goes back into the bathroom, right, what do you want to call it? The reporter shows up. And the reporter says, look, I want to talk to you about this. He goes, leave me alone. He goes, no, listen. He goes, here we have a lawyer with a conscience. He says, this is like the perfect story. A lawyer that wants to do good. And he goes, you got to give me the story on this. So Keanu Reeves says, okay, fine, but tomorrow. And then as the reporter walks out of the bathroom, you see that this is Al Pacino. It's the devil in disguise. And he says, I got him. In other words, pride. He says, see, even when you're doing good, he goes, I still found a way to get him. So the idea is that if we start out with the fact that you can't outwit evil, the minute that you think that you figured it out, it's already on to the next scheme. It's almost like having some sort of, if you can imagine like an army exercise or whatever, where you think that you have the perfect plan laid out, but they're always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. So that's how it is with this. So, we're going to try to figure out exactly how does beauty work in relation to our faith, and then how does it really work? How are we misled to not quite get how beauty is the bottom rung of our epistemological ladder? Now, if we go back to the Genesis mythos, God said in the beginning, I'll, separate the waters. And if you remember the scenario at the end of each little segment, each day, if you look at it that way, God says, and it was good. Now, the word good in Hebrew is tov, and it means good. But it also has other connotations. It doesn't just mean good. It also means it's in right order. In other words, God, this is the story. It's not about how he created the sun and the moons. It's that when he created these things, they were exactly as he intended them. Everything was in perfect harmony. So the relationship between, if you remember, this is prior to the fall. So the relationship between the man and the woman, they were entirely naked, but they were naked without shame because neither of them had to worry about the objectifying gaze of the other person. The gaze was interior. The relationship with the environment, with animals, everything was perfect. There was total harmony there. Everything was exactly how it should be. That's another meaning of tov. So we can understand this as beauty. Remember, I tried to make the connection that when a plan just works out perfectly, we often say, oh, it's beautiful. The reason why we say that is because everything was in perfect harmony. Think back to Aristotle and such. So when God said it was good, it was in right order, you can understand, and the word tov was used sometimes in the Old Testament, that it means it's beautiful. Okay, so if we can understand beauty as everything being in harmony and in right order, then we're going to have to start making a case. Then what is this mythos of the fall? If we can get past worrying about who ate the apple and who gave the apple to who, if you can just forget about all the mechanics of it, because even the literal part of the story is important for us to understand the metaphorical part. We're trying to understand this as being our story. What is the meaning behind all of this, right? So what happens is that in the fall, what we see happening is the individuals now have disordered passions. Passion, think of the passion, it's not just this, but think of it in terms of a desire, right? So a person who, if we could know perfectly what food is necessary for our well-being, if we could know that perfectly, we would then only do those things. But we would still struggle because we might desire things that are not good for us. So anytime that we desire something that perhaps is going to bring us grief another day, it could be people that you're dating, it could be people that you marry, it could be relationships you're in, just in friendship and stuff. Sometimes this isn't good for me, that type of thing. It's because our passions become disordered. So what happens is our intellect and our desires become twisted. So, by the way, when you hear things within the Catholic Church when they talk about disordered, states, don't think mental, right? Or don't think like it's some, how do you want to say, psychological determination. It's trying to say that there's something outside of what we should be doing. In other words, something's not in right order here, okay? Um, so what we have is the fall is supposed to be the story that represents how did we get this clouded intellect? Why can't we see things perfectly? I mean, why was it that now a man and woman in the story had to actually, make themselves, the fig leaves, right? And then even God, if you read the story, even God himself comes down and actually makes aprons for them both to wear. And it's not because those things are bad. All of a sudden, what we would call the private parts, and there's a reason why we call it that, they didn't become bad or evil. What happens is they became extremely important to who we are as persons. And to this day, we think that when you go to the beach, even if bathing suits are pretty skimpy, we know what parts each sex covers. They're not covering those things because they're bad. They're covering because something that is private needs to remain so and not public, because the other person could objectify us with those gaze, and we're trying to protect ourselves from that objectification. It's the clouded intellect that does that. So, if you read through the Genesis mythos and don't get all this, you're missing it. For those people that think it's locked into some sort of literal interpretation of how the earth was created in 6 days, this is what you miss in all of that. Why the Catholic Church totally supports anything that's scientific, because it's not a scientific exposition of exactly what's happened, okay? So in Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, there's various brothers here. Dmitri is the one speaking here. Dmitri is this one of the brothers who represents almost an Epicurean type desire-filled things. There's other brothers that are more rationalistic and such. It's really something you should read. So what, and Dostoevsky is an absolute genius when it comes to putting theology through his work. And by the way, he's not very fond of Roman Catholicism. He's Russian Orthodox. So he talks in this one line, and Dmitri says, believe me, that for the immense mass of mankind, beauty is found in Sodom. Now, forget about what you think, Sodom is or not. Just understand that in this context, it represents a disordered state, all right? Do you know the secret, he says? The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. Now, terrible means mighty, like God's terrible deeds. Don't think like they're bad. So it's mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the human heart. All right. So here's the idea, is that there's many interpretations on this. One is not that Sodom is evil, but there's some sort of disorder that's going on there. And the disorder is in how it's destroying beauty, or at least deflecting our understandings of beauty. But the reality is that Dimitri's making the point here through this novel, well, let's say Dostoevsky through Dmitri, that the fight is really over beauty. And that is within the human person's soul. Now, we'll think of this in heart. Like, remember, men without chest. We're going to think of the virtue center of the human person. But we rarely think in terms of religion or spirituality about how our understanding of beauty affects everything else. We might see things beautiful and then have a spiritual sense about it, but there's something underneath that that's drawing us towards that. We rarely think that we need to understand and capture a grasp of beauty in order for us to move on in our spirituality. Typically, we start with the intellect, right? Or we start with the feelings. Now, when I gave you the men without chest, tell me if this, well, I'm asking a rhetorical question. How many types of religious services that go on that are purely emotional? In other words, did you get something out of it? Like, so if somebody were to tell me, well, I went to mass and I got nothing out of it, the response should be, without being cynical, well, good, because it wasn't about you. In other words, maybe you should have a good experience, but it's not about your emotional experience. That's the guttural. Somebody says, well, I didn't understand what's going on. Why didn't they explain this, that? Okay, you're bringing an intellectual approach. It's not that that's bad, but it's not just about the intellect. So it's the heart, right? It's this understanding of the seat of virtue and the soul that's supposed to mediate and both of these things. And without that, we become nothing more than what Lewis said, men without chest. So what we need to do, if we can make the case, and I'm only making it very superficially here, if we don't have time to build it out, we need a redemption of beauty. And that is not something you typically hear in the world, because people will always think that beauty is subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. But see, that's part of the deception. The minute that you buy in, and remember, I'm not talking about taste. We can all like different types of music, right? I get, I like Zepp. I get everybody doesn't like that. That's a matter of taste. It's not a matter of beauty. I already showed you some pictures, like that young girl, the man who killed his neighbor's son, and they've formed a loving relationship, you name it. All those things are objective aspects of beauty. But if we can be sold that beauty is subjective and we buy into that, then evil is taken out the bottom rung of the ladder. And all of a sudden now we can't get to truth. We're going to start thinking, well, truth is a construct. That's your truth and this is my truth. Goodness, well, there's no nature to the human person. We also make that. So it's not really a matter of what is truly good. It's only a matter of what you or I might think is good for us. Now, I don't think I'm exaggerating our current culture, all right? But the idea isn't just to be a cultural critic. It's how do we get through this? So if we have a distorted vision of beauty, then all we're going to wind up doing is having a distorted vision of truth and a distorted vision of goodness. These things are not going to settle themselves out on their own. So the article that you were supposed to read always talks about this, well, it's not always, it talks about this joyful sorrow, right? In other words, I know that you've all heard the phrase an unquenchable thirst. What do you think that means, an unquenchable thirst? And if you think it's obvious, you might be missing it. What do you think it means to say somebody has an unquenchable thirst? Anybody want to try?
Isn't that like a hunger in a way?
It is a hunger, Keon. But it's not, that's the typical interpretation, but it's not just a hunger, right? Because, the thirst would metaphorically represent a hunger. Why is it unquenchable? That's the problem. Why is it unquenchable?
You're never satisfied, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's true. That's the part. So if you want a really good image of a person that has an unquenchable thirst, the person who's dying of thirst next to a well full of fresh water. In other words, it's there. It's no longer do they realize this is good for the individual. So how many things that are good in our life that we actually put off to the side because we're searching for other things? In other words, it's almost like people dying of hunger when your cupboards are full. So, this is part of the struggle that we have trying to figure out exactly how does this work then in our own lives, because we fill our lives. Think of this ought to be easy for you. How many things in life, let's forget about, I'll word it this way. How many things in life do you think actually distract from genuine happiness? Give me some examples. What things in life distract from genuine happiness?
Couldn't you say yourself?
I'm sorry, Keon, what?
Couldn't you say yourself?
Well, it is. Yeah, I think so. But give me something like what would self pursue? In other words, if you want genuine happiness for yourself, where might you look for it that's going to distract or deflect you from actually achieving that, or not achieving, but gaining that happiness?
Tinder.
What's that, Ryan?
Tinder.
I'm too old, Ryan. I don't even know what the hell that is.
It's a dating app.
That's a dating app. Okay, there you go. Well, that could distract you, I guess. They ever look like their photos? Isn't that probably the joke? You probably never do. Right?
I never met one in real life. You kidding me?
I wasn't asking you directly. What else though? Okay, so look, you're going to college so that you can become, educated and then use it as education for a particular job. Don't you think your future employment, your job, or whatever you're pursuing as a career, do you think that can hurt your happiness? It can. It's interesting. Well, I'll leave that story on the side. Most of the things that we think are important turn out to be not the things that are necessarily good for us. It's because our desires are disordered. In other words, we all need a certain amount of money to live, but there's never enough. You talk about the unquenchable thirst, there's never enough. When the average person, comes out of school, maybe you're making $35,000, $40,000 a year. Well, maybe more, maybe you'll make 60. You go into a particular field, you're making that kind of money, you'll live within your means. 10, 15 years later, you might be making about 110. The reality is you're just living larger. You're going on better vacations, you're driving nicer cars, live in a bigger house. In other words, nothing ever gets satisfied. If you ask somebody how much money would be enough, they might come up with a figure, but they'd have a hard time staying within that realm. So we have to look through the world and find out, what exactly are those distractions that are bringing us away from beauty. Look what's going on even today with all of us, sort of huddled in our little homes and such. Um, you know, Not to put myself out there, but this is not even a really big issue for myself. We live pretty simply as it is. So who's affected by this? I can't go and see my grandkids, but other than that, we're not really living that much differently. Um, Everybody always talked about global climate change and how, we need to have things in place to help fix it. They say the Earth's getting greener over the fact that everybody shut down. What's different? What's different is people are consuming less. Nobody needs a law to make us do that, right? So we always seek answers and such that are like, somehow always, 5 feet in front of us. And we think we have to reach those somehow. And most people, destroy their own relationships because of all the various things that they're seeking. So this joyful sorrow is this understanding that, we live in this disordered state, but so there's joy that it's ahead, right? So I've tried my best to get you, at least from a Christian standpoint, to stop thinking about heaven as a place you go, right? So if you can understand in relational terms, then you can understand it's not like a final meeting. But in your relationships, there's very little things that are, how do you want to say, absolutely neutral. Most of what you do in your relationships are either going to add to that relationship or detract from that relationship. Same thing in a relationship with God. So if we have this joyful sorrow, the joy is that we see this consummation of this peace and beauty that we're once going to have, but we're sorrowful that we don't exactly have it with us now. So it's on a very, bad analogy. You're going to get a degree one day, so there's a certain amount of joy for that, but you have a bit to go through until you get there, right? So you can even talk about that, at least analogously, as a sorrowful joy that you're trying to almost get there. But let me say it this way. It has to be something in the heart. So this isn't anti-intellectual, and this also isn't anti, feelings and such, but there has to be something more. We have to start asking ourselves, and this is a good time to do it. You're home, especially when you're going to be done with school in a couple of weeks and you're not going to have anything else pressing. You're not going to be able to go, well, you might go to work depending, but where are we looking for the noise and distractions in our lives? How can we be the individuals who are at peace with ourselves? This is where we have to redeem beauty. In other words, if we're going to say that the problem with us finding beauty, which will lead to truth and goodness, if we're going to say that the problem with that is that we are distracted, it's almost as if, if you were out walking around your neighborhood and you saw somebody with out-of-state plates come up driving by and ask you questions. How do I get here? All you got to do is just, be a jerk and send them down the other direction and then have a laugh at it. But the reality is that you can do this in a sense with ourselves just by we give ourselves a false sense of what really is good for our own nature. And then we get distracted in that. And it happens all the time. I know cell phones take the brunt of this, right? We think that cell phones and electronics are the things that distract us. And I'm not going to go on a bandit because the reality is the cell phones are more than phones. When I grew up, a phone's a phone. That's all you do with it. Well, today you do so much with it. So they're almost like mini computers. But the reality is that cell phones, they often said, as with social media, distracts us from each other. It doesn't. It distracts us from ourselves. So think of the individuals who can't drive a car without the radio on, or maybe can't be in the house without a radio on, or they have to have the TV on in the background or something. It's an absolute phenomenon when you see people constantly walking around with earbuds, almost as if or worse yet, the Bluetooth, right? I mean, I've done it, even on campus. The person's walking next to me and I turn around and I start talking to them. So I'm thinking he asked me something and realize they're on the phone, we got a Bluetooth in. It's just like we have any peaceful moments with ourselves. It's really the last place that most of us want to be is alone in our own minds. We don't feel comfortable. Think about how often when's the last time you read through a book? Read a book. It takes time, doesn't it? Or even worse yet, read a book and then talk about it with somebody. I have a book behind me. It's called Aristotle Ran General Motors. And there's the Morris is the guy's name. He puts a counterfeit to every virtue. And when he talks about the virtue of beauty, he says, not the how do you want to say, how did he say it? The falsified version of beauty in the world is titillation. Titillation is that thing that just excites us, right? So we've given up beauty for the point of entertainment. And we now believe that when we're entertained, that somehow that's giving us beauty. As long as we're being agitated, as long as we're being distracted, we we have a sense that that worked for us. And the reality is, this is why we have an unquenchable thirst. We're literally, dying to our, if you want to call it, dying to ourselves next to a well full of fresh water for us. Right? So that's part of the issues that we have going on. So what we try to do is we have to find ways to recover silence. There's a good scripture that, God speaks to us in a whisper, and it probably would do us good. And by the way, this would do us good psychologically, if not even just spiritually. I don't know if you can where you live. I have a little fire pit in the backyard, and from whatever reason, I don't get bit by mosquitoes. The rest of my family does. So I just sit out there, build a fire, and absolutely quiet with myself. Just think deep thoughts. It sounds silly. It's just a way to start to get at peace with yourself. You're trying to recover silence, because silence is the antidote to distraction. If we're going to say that beauty is important and the problem with beauty is distraction, then the way to get rid of the distraction is to get into silence. And if we can be comfortable with ourselves in silence, then we're going to find a way to recover this. Now, the Hesychast prayer is, it's also like, it's a repetition of the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. It's a repetitive thing. So it's a type of spirituality. It's not unlike saying the rosary. It's just different, right? So people say, why, I don't understand why the rosary makes any sense. All you're doing is repeating a Hail Mary, repeating the Hail Mary. So what are you, just counting it? It's like doing laps around the beads, and then you think somehow that makes God happy. Okay, all that cynicism, and by the way, that's the stuff that I said growing up. All that cynicism misses the whole point. It's like a mantra. It's interesting that a lot of people and a lot of friends that I have who grew up in a Christian atmosphere become very enamored with the Eastern concepts of meditation and such, because it seems exotic, it seems something outside, and it seems like, it does something. And that's okay. I'm not here to diminish that. But I often say these traditions are within your own belief system. How do you not know this? So when a person says the prayer, anybody who said the rosary more than once or twice, they know that prayer becomes a mantra. You're supposed to be reflecting on the mysteries as you do it. So, my wife says it, twice a day. When she's saying it, she's not just repeating these prayers. This Hesychast prayer is the same way. It's just the repeating of something, trying to settle down your mind. In other words, you're trying to focus so that you can have some sort of moments where you can recover silence. All I'm trying to do is connect the recovery of silence to the overcoming of the distraction. And if you overcome the distraction, you can reclaim beauty. If you reclaim beauty, you're going to back on a path to truth and goodness. This is all interconnected like this. So synergistic, what that means is, as opposed to monergistic, synergistic is, from a Catholic and Orthodox standpoint, it's always God and us. It's never just, God doing something for us. It's always God drawing us into whatever it is his plans are in our lives. So it's not the same, though, as God allowing you to do it and then accepting what you've done. It's almost as that, I know this is going to sound weird, but this is the way it needs to be understood. It's the Holy Spirit praying through us. So it's almost like God having an intra-Trinitarian conversation with himself, and he's drawing us into that conversation. I know that sounds peculiar, but the whole idea is that all of creation, remember, we're not just in relation between male and female, it's relation between all creation. It's almost as if God is drawing all that back to himself. So this is a terrible analogy, but if you can imagine all of us having little magnets in ourselves, and God is this big magnet, he's drawing us all back to him. That magnetic, if you want to call it that magnetic draw, is the Holy Spirit pulling us towards him. That's synergy, right? So there has to be a part of us. So in other words, we have to get over our own distractions in order to reclaim beauty. And we need to do this by trying to recover silence. It's the one thing that the modern world really lacks, the ability just to be amongst themselves. So the whole point of it is, and you might have heard this before, that whatever goes into our minds has to find its way into our heart. This doesn't mean that we have to be an intellectual. Doesn't mean that we don't have to do the emotional, get rid of that. It just means that the virtue, the center of the human person, has to, be the liaison between both the chest, which is, between the stomach, which is the visceral, and between the head, which is the intellectual. So there has to be, in a person's prayer, a way for this heart to help recapture. Now, here's the thing. We often think that we can do things in life and it has no effect on who we are, as human persons in our heart. We do this again as our own distraction because we can't deal with the reality of it. And I'll give you an analogy. Could you imagine if anybody who thinks that they can eat something and say, well, it doesn't affect my bloodstream? Well, I'm eating this, but it really doesn't affect my liver. I'm eating this, but it doesn't affect my, circulatory system or my, you name it, nervous system. You would start to think, what are you talking about? Your body's an integrated, being. Whatever you take in your mouth, okay, maybe it doesn't directly go into your blood. How can you possibly say that? You probably have a pretty sound argument with the individual that they're talking in a way that's not quite competent to think that you can actually eat something or ingest something and it doesn't affect your body, only one part. Well, how can we think that those things we do in our lives, our actions, our morality doesn't affect who we are as individuals in the seat of our heart, right? I don't know if I'm easy to talk to or what, but I know when I taught high school, I think sometimes people thought I was a counselor, and I had to keep telling them I'm not a counselor. If you got something you need to talk about, you got to go talk to a priest or a counselor. But oftentimes, especially the young girls, they would come up and say, they had a sexual relationship, and the individual they don't sense that it meant the same thing for them as it did for themselves, for the other person. And I say, well, truer words have not been spoken. I don't know, what are you telling me? Are you confessing something? Because I'm not a priest. And they said, well, no. They said, I don't understand, why I would give myself to somebody, and it's really affected me, and it doesn't seem to affect the other person. And I said, well, okay, first of all, why did you think? And I said, I'm not here to, judge you. So I said, I'm not even saying that. Why did you think that you can give yourself to somebody sexually and it wouldn't affect your heart? Who came up with that? Are you a disembodied being? Is your body entirely separate from everything else as part of who you are? Well, no. I said, well, then why did you think that would not affect it? And she goes, well, I know that the Catholic Church talked about sex before marriage. And I said, look, first of all, I'm not getting into this legalistic stuff with you. I said, don't even use the word Catholic Church. I said, by the way, again, I'm not doing this with you. I'm not trying to be legalistic. I told this young girl, I said, there any Christian denomination, name one, that doesn't say that? They said, well, I don't know of any. So there is none. I said, so don't put this on the shoulders of somebody else. I said, but let's put that aside. Let's forget about that being a rule, because that's a terrible way to understand it. You just expressed what exactly happens. I said, do you really think that you can have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sexual partners, and those things, once you're married, have no effect on you whatsoever? You really think that? She goes, well, no, I don't, but I'm not sure what the effect they have. I said, well, neither am I. I said, all I'm trying to make sense is that the same way that whatever we bring into our mouths is going to affect our physiology, whoever we let that close, and it doesn't even have to be a sexual encounter. To anybody who we let that intimate into our lives, it's going to affect our hearts. We have to start realizing that we're not, isolated in the world like this. So what happens is this synergy between us and God, and this idea that things have to not just remain in the mind, but also have to make it to the heart. Anything that frustrates that's ugly. Anything. Because it's taking away from beauty, right? So if somebody treats you poorly and they didn't appreciate who you were, you would think that's ugly. It is ugly what they did, but it's ugly because it's frustrated the right order. It's ugly because it has broken up beauty, and that's why it's ugly. Things are no longer how they should be. All we're trying to do is connect all these things and not pretend that we can have these isolated aisles where one thing we do, we can't compartmentalize. Well, this is what I do in my private life. This is what I do in my public life. This is what I do in my family life. You can get away with that if you're a sociopath, but you can't do that if you're an integrated human person, right? So we're trying to figure out how this all works out. So the fruits of the Jesus prayer, let's go back to this. Now, this is an Eastern Orthodox thing, so it's not even a Roman Catholic practice, but there's nothing foreign to Roman Catholicism in this. First of all, it's centering. So what centering is you have to get into a silent mode, and you need to be free of distractions. We have all kinds of things in our houses today. I bet you that if we took a poll across campus, we'd be lucky to find 2 people who actually had a place of dedicated prayer in their house. I bet you if I started asking how many TVs we have, that wouldn't be very hard. And I bet you if we even started asking who has a little mini theater, we probably have a bunch of those. We have a lot of things that are breaking up our distraction, a lot of things that are helping us to get beyond all that. So you need to find a place, and you need to find a time. And, it might be difficult depending on where we're at in our stage in life, but we have to get ourselves away from all distractions. So, when I say centering, this isn't just something, ethereal that, if you want to go out and find in the middle of the woods, fine. If you want to get in a kayak and go in the middle of a lake, that's a good idea too. Do whatever you possibly can do to remove yourself from every distraction. And you need to calm yourself down. And by the way, you can use other methods, right? Like use methods of breathing and such. Just trying to calm yourself down. If you can imagine lowering your blood pressure. We love these people. You guys all know Mr. Rogers, right? Mr. Rogers, they always say he's that kind of guy when he used to walk into a room, everybody's blood pressure would go down 15 points. Could you imagine being that type of individual? So that's the centering. Now, remembering God, make certain if this shows up on a final, you are not telling me to remember what God did. This is not an intellectual recollection. This is like anamnesis. This is almost in liturgy, where God has done for us in the person of Jesus Christ is being made present once again. So this is almost making present of all those things that God has done and has sustained us in our lives. After we have calmed ourselves down in center, we are now starting to almost fill the void. We're going to create a void. Now we're going to start filling it with these various understandings of exactly what God does for us. Then the sacrificing love, love again is that word that we can say that it's willing the good of the other. But if you really want good examples of love, think of those individuals where parents have sacrificed everything, right? Like I think of how my particular wife has given up so much in her career, her wants, her desires, almost everything, just for the sake of our kids. Now, somebody might say, well, that was sexist and that, but it was her choice. Nobody forced anything on it. I'm not saying that everybody should do this. But in reality, could you imagine living 35 years or so, and you look back and you say, there's very little I did that I wanted to do, and mean it, and mean it, it's that level of self-sacrificing love. It's always considering the other person and before ourselves. It's easy for parents to do for their children. It's not as easy for husbands and wives to do for each other, although that's part of the problem. But what you're trying to say is if this is a course on justice, if you want justice to happen in the world, then you be the one that makes that justice happen. So you think of all the things that are going on right now with the COVID-19 and the fact that we are all sort of isolated. What good can you do? How creative can you get to bring justice to the world, your immediate world? Not fixing the, Pennsylvania's, issues, just the people in your neighborhood. That's a self-sacrificing love. And then finally, this concept of longing. It's almost like this is the one thing, we have this joyful sorrow where we have something unquenchable. In other words, it's the idea that I constantly yearn for more. The nice thing that I have found in being married over the years is that you constantly discover something new about the individual. It's not about what they like or dislike. It's almost like a part of them unfolds to you that it was revealed in a way that you've never known. This relationship works too with God that way, right? Because you want a relationship, it unfolds in front of you. Over time, these concepts of longing actually take on new forms. And not only does it become a yearning, but you understand something deeper. If you start understanding something, but you cannot articulate it, now you're getting into a real good mystery, okay? Because most of the things in our life that are the most sublime things, we're going to have a hard time articulating it. Somebody says, how do you love this person? How do you love your mother or father? If you struggle with that, good. Because it should be difficult to really articulate, but you know it. I think if somebody said, well, how do you really know it? I don't think you'd argue that, right? So that's the concept of longing that I'm trying to talk about here. So what this means is we have to like totally restructure all of our unconscious priorities. In other words, how can we live differently, and how can we apply this understanding of love that we have to get rid of distractions? So could you imagine if you made a concerted effort that, and I'm just, for 1 week, you're going to remove everything that distracts in your life, whoever your significant other is, right? Let's pretend you actually have the opportunity to do this. It's summer, nothing else is going on, you're not working right now, and you say for 1 week, I am going to do nothing but focus on the distractions that separate me from that person I say that I love, and I'm going to work towards this relationship. Okay, that's how life should work to get rid of distractions. There's no reason why we can't put this in the rest of our world like this, right? So you guys may have seen this, and then I want to ask you some questions. You may have seen this before. Has anybody seen this before, by the way? No nods? Okay. This was a picture taken up in Boston when the movie stars of the movie called The Black Mass. Now, The Black Mass is a mafia movie about Whitey Bulger. So you have, what is his name? I totally blanked. Who's the guy from Pirates of the Caribbean? Captain Sparrow. What's his name?
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp. Okay, so Johnny Depp was this. So these are the streets lined with people who are waiting for the movie stars to show up so that they can, experience it. Now, the reason why this, photograph by John Blanding became so famous is, look at it. Who there is really experiencing it? If you one person, this lady. The rest of them are trying to record it. Think of how many photos people take. And what are you going to do with all these photos? I mean, you. What are you going to do with all these photos? I mean, I must have about you, I bet you, maybe I have like 30 photos of myself before I was, from birth to 18. And I even look at them. I bet you probably have 500 photos on your camera roll. Nobody's ever going to look at these things. So we don't try to experience things. We think that we're preserving them or capturing them. But you can't come up with a better icon of a distraction than this. That lady is probably the only person that's truly experiencing this. I was like a fuddy-duddy when when we had our kids. My wife was always on me, photograph this, not that she really cared, but, take a picture of this. Let's borrow a movie camera. I said, I don't want to do any of that. Can't we just experience this stuff? I'll keep it in my heart, because I'm not going to look at these pictures. And if I take, if I'm there with the camera, even on my daughter's 16th birthday, I did it, right? And we lost the tape. Ooh. But I can't experience it because I'm so bad. I'm so busy recording all these things. So, okay, fine. That's just an example. But in our lives, most of what we do is little more than distractions. And you can't get to now I realize these are just movie stars, right? But you can't get to the beauty of something because all we're wind up really doing in the end is trying to, do something that we think is filling the void. But it's unquenchable. So, okay. That's my spiel. So, what do you think?